أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, the fourth session in first khutbah number 1 of Nahj al-Balaghah. And so far we've discussed the beginning of this khutbah, which starts with praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hamd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second portion then dives into the ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which then includes the khilqat and the creation of the universe and the alam. And remember last week when we talked about it, there were certain things which was beyond our understanding. Because of course this is the nature of the discussion where Imam is coming from an aspect and he's addressing people till the day of judgment, right? Like just the way Quran is, where Quran was understood one way by people who lived at that time, because it was their limited resources. They looked at Quran and they looked at the ayat of Quran, and whatever limited resources they had, they understood it based on that. And that's why I've mentioned this before in my majlis as well, that someone asked my father, why are you doing the tafsir of Quran, or why are you doing the translation of Quran in Urdu? And he responded by saying that translation should be done every 50 years. Why? Because human progresses and the mind progresses every 50, 100 years. And when you progress and then you come and read Quran, it makes difference. It changes the meaning for you altogether. Because your understanding 50 years ago, your understanding 100 years ago was different as those who lived at that time than your understanding today. And similarly is the case with Nahj al-Balaghah. Imam, when he compiled this, or when he spoke these khutbahs or sermons, when he gave these sermons, the intention, of course, was to address those who were right there. But at the same time, you can understand Imam is speaking to the minds of today. Imam is speaking to the intellectuals of today. Imam is addressing that progressive mind that has gone to a level where is able to see the skies and able to study that which is in the creation of the universe, and then the intricacies of things that are created in the universe to that minute detail. So that's where you find some of the minor details that Imam speaks about in regards to the creation of alam, and that's why we showed our ignorance, saying that we are not experts in it, so we'll refrain from diving into too much. We'll just translate and we'll move forward. If it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, that is because our minds have not arrived at that juncture yet. So that was as far as Khalqul Alam was concerned. But now keep in mind, all of these discussions have to do with your ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The objective behind knowing all of these things is to have the ma'rifat of Allah. You recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this. Ma'rifat of Allah is the perspective and the main maqsad and the aim of Imam with this first khutbah. First khutbah is not that Imam is trying to flex muscles. Oh, look, I know about the alam. This is what the heavens and the earth and the skies and the mountains, this is what it's made of. Imam is, saying, oh, I know about the creation of the atom, or creation of the anbiya and the creation of the malaika, specifically Jibreel and Mikael and so on and so forth. I know about the creation of Hazrat Adam, for example. No, Imam is primarily, the purpose behind all of this discussion is so that you and I get what? Get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the main objective over here. So we arrive at this juncture where Imam speaks about Khalqul Malaika. He begins by saying, ثُمَّ فَتَقَ مَا بَيْنَ السَّمَاوَاتِ الْعُلَى فَمَلَأَهُنَّ أَطْوَارًا مِنْ مَلَائِكَتِهِ. Is that what it is? That Then Allah created the intervening layers of sky. ثُمَّ فَتَقَ مَا بَيْنَ السَّمَوَاتِ الْأُولَى. So you've always heard, the layers of skies and the layers of heavens. Usually you hear 7 layers, for example. And then the layers are compared with the layers and the earth. So sometimes the word translated as heavens, or sometimes you translate it as skies. Sky is really nothing. There's no such thing as a sky. You just look up and you see that if there's no cloud, you see the blue background. You call that to be a sky. But really, it's not something which is like a shade or some sort of shelter or some sort of ceiling. It's not really a ceiling. But anyway, here it refers to the heavens. When it says that Allah filled these different layers with different malaika. Now, when Rasulullah ascended to Mi'raj, he went through all of these different levels of the heavens. He went through different stages of it, and he met different anbiya, and he met different malaika over there as well. So that corresponds with that. But what is happening in these different layers? You have these different categories of malaika. Malaika bhi sare ek level ke nahi hai. There are certain malaika who are at a highest level, so, such as Hazrat Jibreel Amin, right? Alayhi salatu wassalam. Man kana aduwan le Jibreel wa Mikail. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls out those people in Surah Baqarah. Those who are the enemies of Jibreel and Mikail. Right? That means there are those who keep animosity towards them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them out in the beginning of Surah Baqarah. And then you have the other tier of malaika whose job is, for example, the affairs of the wind, whose job is, for example, when it comes to rain, whose job is, for example, other things that they're doing. But then there's certain whose job is none of those things, whose job is only to do ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a job for them. They are created only for what? To serve and keep their head in the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's their job. That's what Imam is referring to over here. Imam is not referring to Jibreel Amin. Imam is not referring to Hazrat Israfil or Azrael or other. Imam is referring to those who are there to worship him. He says what? He said, Minhum sujudun la yarka'un. Amongst these angels, some of them remain in the state of sajda, prostration. They're constantly in the state of sajda. They're just doing sajda to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sujudun la yarka'un. They never come into the ruku position. They never bow. They're always constantly in the position of sajda. Now, sajda is the elite position, if you call it. Namaz is Mi'rajul Mu'min. And within this Mi'raj of Mu'min is what? Sajda is the peak of namaz. So when you are in the state of sajda, you are at the peak of this salat. That's why when Rasulullah ascended to the heavens, he spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah asked him, Ya Ahmad, بِأَيِّ وَقْتٍ يَتَقَرَّبُ الْأَبْدُ مِنَ الْمَعْبُودِ. When is it my servant closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? So, of course, Rasulullah has the answer. But in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's going to speak? Right? Just imagine you're standing in front of, unfortunately I have to give example, a king, right? You're standing in front of a marja taqleed, forget the king. You're standing in front of marja taqleed, and a question is asked. You'll say, Marja, please, you go ahead and answer. You need my answer from, right? Out of what? Out of humbleness, humility, and as well as, of course, your daraja and your maqam. So what does Rasulullah say? He said, La adri. In adri. I don't know. You tell me, O Allah. Then Allah responds, when the servant is closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? إِذَا كَانَ جَائِئًا أَوْ سَاجِدًا. When my servant is empty stomach and he's in the state of sajda. When you haven't eaten anything, when you're fasting, and when you do sajda, that is when you're closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So right here it says same, minhum sujudun la yarka'un. There are those who are doing sajda and they never stand up to do the ruku of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that, they never get up to do ruku. Ruku itself is a very big, undertaking. But sajda is the peak of salat. That's why when Amirul Mu'mineen said to Rasulullah that I wonder why I did not attain shahadat in Badr, in Uhud. All my friends were martyred. I was not martyred. Rasulullah said, no, you will be martyred one day. And that's why when Imam was struck in the best of the months, Ramadan, in the best of the nights, Laylatul Qadr, in the best of the places, Masjid, in the best of the halat, Salat, in the best of the position in Salat, Sajda. Right? Imam is in Sajda, Salat, the Mi'raj al-Mu'min, Sajda is the peak of Salat, in the month of Ramadan, in the night of Qadr, in Masjid-e-Kufa. Imam is what? Struck on that. That's why he said what? Fusto Rabbil Kaaba. I am indeed faiz, I am indeed successful. And then, وَرُكُوعٌ لَا يَنْتَصِبُونَ. And then some are bowing without standing. So they're constantly in the position of ruku. And they never get up. There's a story of marhum. There was this Sheikh Abul Hasan Isfahani. Sheikh Abul Hasan Isfahani, if you look up his halat, these days you can just search it up on Google and Chat GPT and you'll find halat of Sheikh Abul Hasan Isfahani. Known for his ibadat. He was the marja of his time, probably 100 years ago, 150 years ago. He lived in Mashhad. And Mashhad gets cold. You've been to Mashhad, many of you. It gets cold. It even snows over there during winter time. So, Sheikh was known for his tulul sujud wa tulul qiyam. So one day he goes to the haram, and haram is not as big as it is today. Let's say haram is probably the hall right here. That's how big the haram of Imam Rada was at that time. So he goes to the haram, and it's open and closed. They're both, there's courtyards, this is open, and then there's a sahin which is open. So it was cold, he starts praying. He goes into the position of ruku. The mutawalli of the haram had to leave, lock the haram, go and then come back for Fajr. But he saw the Sheikh was praying. But Sheikh was regular there. So he said, let me bring some fire near him so that keeps him warm. It was cold night. And he goes home and inshallah Maulana will lock the door when he goes out. Right? The mutawalli leaves. He comes back in the morning, half hour, an hour before Salatul Fajr, so he can set up the masjid and for namazis. He comes and he sees the doors open. He says, Sheikh should have closed the door on his way out. He left it open. And it snowed that day too, that night. So he makes his way to the haram and he sees that Sheikh is still in the position of ruku. Sheikh Abul Hasan Isfahani is still in the position of ruku. In fact, there's some snow on his back. Meaning what? When he left him in the state of ruku, he has not lifted his head back up from it. And that's not imam, that's not ma'asum, that's not a malaika, that's, a pious man. And so I was worried about the well-being of the Sheikh. Did he pass away? Did he die in his ruku? Is it possible? But then, the time passed, I started giving the adhan. Sheikh got up, he finished his salat, came back and he led the namaz. So there have been people who spend their nights just in the state of qiyam and qu'ud and ruku and sujood. Quickly, let's go over this. So there are these angels who are always prostrating. There's some who are bowing without standing. There's some who are standing in lines and they're never changing their positions. وَصَافُونَ لَا يَتَزَايَلُونَ وَمُسَبِّحُونَ La yas'amuna. And then there are those who are doing the tasbih of Allah, extolling Him without getting any fatigue. Yas'amun, they're not getting tired of doing the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know how sometimes we start getting tired? No, their job is to do the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they never get tired of doing the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La yakhshahum nawmul uyun, and their eyes never sleep. So here we thought, Allah was la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wala nawm, that Allah does not sleep or He doesn't have slumber. There are these angels, according to Imam, la yaghshahum nawmul uyun wala sahvun uqul, that their eyes never sleep, their minds never roam aloof, and their bodies never weaken, and their memories never falter. So, la sahvul uqul, la fatratul abdan, their bodies are never tired, wala ghaflatul nisyan, and of course they never forget what they're doing. Sometimes you might even forget what you were doing. You're praying and you forget you were praying because something else occupied your mind. No, their job and their duty is to do this, and they do it without any faltering. They say, وَمِنْهُمْ أُمَنَاءٌ عَلَى وَحْيِهِ. Inshallah, we'll finish it within our time. وَمِنْهُمْ أُمَنَاءُ عَلَى وَحْيِهِ. Did I go past it? Yep. And then amongst them are those who are umana, trustworthy or trusted ones. In an institution, there's a Hayatul Umana, the board of trustees. So umana comes from trustees. So these angels are referred to as what? Those who are trusted bearers of His message. So who was the trusted bearer of the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In the form of Hazrat Jibreel Amin, who would bring the Quran and the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether the words of Quran or whether the words of Hadith Qudsi that Jibreel Amin would deliver to Rasulullah. And then those who speak to the prophets, of course, Jibreel is al-sinatun ila rusulihi wa mukhtalifuna biqada'ihi wa amrihi. And also those who carry out His orders and injunctions. Wa minhumul hafazatu li ibadihi. And then among them are those who are charged with the protection of His creatures. Ibad, you and I, they're there to go ahead and provide protection to us. وَالسَّدَنَةُ لِأَبْوَابِ جِنَانِهِ. And then of course there are those who guard the gates of heaven. So we've always heard, Rizwanun min Allah, that the one who will be standing on the door of the heavens, they're angels. We know the names of them. Rizwan is the name that is mentioned in Quran as well, about the ones who guard the doors of the heaven. And so Imam refers to those as well. وَمِنْهُمْ الثَّابِتَةُ فِي الْأَرَضِينَ السُّفْلَى. And then amongst them, did I go past this? Okay. أَقْدَامُهُمْ السُّفْلَى أَقْدَامُهُمْ. And then among them are those who are, whose steps are fixed on earth. That is the next one. منهم الثابتة في الأرضين, जिनके पाँव जो हैं वो ज़मीन में गड़े हुए हैं. Now, not literally, but when you say, he has one branch over there and has one branch over there, meaning he's got an eye on both places. He's keeping an eye on his business over there, and he's, keeping an eye on his business over there as well. So that's what it means to these. وَمِنْهُمْ ثَابِتٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Some angels have their feet deep in the earth and their heads up in the sky. And their bodies are not confined to space. It says, وَالْمَارِقَةُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ الْعُلْيَا عَنَاقُهُمْ وَالْخَارِجَةُ مِنَ الْأَقْطَارِ أَرْكَانُهُمْ. That their bodies are not confined. When it comes to their bodies, they're all not confined to the space. And their shoulders, أَكْتَافُهُمْ أَرْكَانُهُمْ وَالْمُنَاسِبَةُ لِقَوَائِمِ الْأَرْشِ أَكْتَافُهُمْ. And the shoulders are the cushions of His throne. Now, these are all analogies. These are not, take it in the literal sense that there are people, sometimes even when you give these titles to, back in the day, there were certain titles that were given to the court of a king. Some people were the barriers of the sword of the king. Some people were the barriers of the cushion and the throne and all of those. So this is something to just give us an idea that these are the angels who are doing all of these things for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that Allah is in need of someone carrying his throne. Not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sitting on the throne. But these are the duties that have been given to some of these angels. And then it says, نَاكِسَةٌ دُونَهُ أَبْصَارُهُمْ مُتَلَفِّعُونَ تَحْتَهُ بِأَجْنِيَاتِهِمْ. They hold their eyes downwards in humility before Allah. So of course, who's going to look up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They keep their eyes نَاكِسَةٌ دُونَ أَبْصَارُهُمْ. This is mentioned in the riwayat of Rasulullah as well, that when Ya Mashar when the Qiyamah will take place, the first person to enter the Mahshar is Janab Fatmatul Zahra Salamullah Alayha. And as she enters, Nada Munadin, Munadi will call, Ya Mashar al Jinni wal Ins, oh people, oh Jinn, oh the Ins, Ghaddu Absarakum. Oh, wa nakasu, lower your heads, close your eyes, hatta tamurra Fatima. Lower your heads, close your eyes, because the Sawari of Fatmatul Zahra is passing by. That is the respect of Fatmatul Zahra on the Day of Judgment. That even there, everyone who's present, of course everyone is present. There's no one who's absent that day. Whether it be jinn or the ins, be malaika or others, they're all present. What does the munadi say? Lower your heads and close your eyes. Hatta tamurra Fatima, until Fatima passes by. So when that is the respect of Fatmatul Zahra on the Arsh Ilahi, just imagine the respect that she would have on the Farsh as well. Madrubatum bainahum wa baina man dunahum hujubun al-izza. That refers to that they hold their eyes downwards in humility before Allah. They stand under the throne wrapped in their glorious wings, bi'ajniha, mazrubatun bainahum, separated from the rest of the veils of supremacy and the curtains of power. Yatawahhamuna rabbahum bit-taswir. They do not perceive their creator in any form of shape. They don't start saying, oh, Allah is like this or Allah is like this. Allah ki aisi naak hai aur aisa kaan hai aur aisi shakal hai aur aisa ye hai. No, they don't associate any of those things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the denial of any bodily aspect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although Quran says, kullu shayin halik illa wajha. Everything will perish except the face of Allah. Quran says, Sami'un Alim, that Allah has ears and He's all hearing. Quran does mention Yadullah fawqa aydihim, God has hands. Quran does mention Alal Arsh istawa, Allah is sitting on the throne. Quran does mention the saq and the pindili and the ankle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that does not mean that Allah has the bodily parts. So this is where the denial of that comes as well. They do not perceive their creator in any form or shape. Why? وَلَا يُجُرُونَ عَلَيْهِ الصِّفَاتَ الْمَصْنُوعِينَ. They do not ascribe to him attributes of his creation. उसने इंसानों के हाथ बनाए, पाँव बनाए, कान बनाए, जानवरों के बनाए, but don't associate those things with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا يُحَدُّونَهُ بِالْأَمَاكِنِ وَلَا يُشِيرُونَ إِلَيْهِ بِالنَّظَائِرِ. And they do not see him as contained in a space or resembling any image. So, conclusion is what? That this portion, which is talking about the malaika, what does it end with? It ends with, understanding and getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It ends with the ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last two lines are the example of the ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that do not confine him within the abodes and do not point at him through illustrations. Why? Allah is beyond your illustrations, your pointing fingers at him, or you're confining him to some sort of abode or some sort of place and makan. That is not how you perceive and understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.